November 13, 2022, a small college town in Idaho. 4 young people would be brutally murdered in their sleep. For weeks, no one knew who did it. Then, a DNA match would lead investigators to an unexpected killer, a man who just lived blocks away. The University of Idaho sits in a quiet town in Moscow. It's the kind of place where students feel safe, where neighbors know each other, where the biggest concern is keeping up with classes. But on November 13, 2022, that safety shattered. Bryan Kohberger was a senior, outgoing. She loved life and lived it fully. Madison Mogen was her best friend. They were inseparable. And Xana Kernodle was a junior with a bright future ahead of her. And Ethan Chaplin was a freshman, just started his college journey. All 4 were brutally murdered in a small rental house on King Road. On the morning of November 13, concerned roommates called 911. They found their friend dead. 4 of them in one house, killed with a knife. The crime scene was horrific. The killer had moved through the house with deliberate purpose, stabbing, slashing, methodical. The medical examiner would later describe wounds so severe that they indicated rage. Focus, controlled rage. 2 roommates had been in that house that night. They heard nothing. They saw nothing. They survived because they weren't in the rooms where the killers went. Police flooded the town. They collected DNA evidence from the crime scene. They interviewed hundreds of people. They followed leads that went nowhere. Days turned into weeks, and the town lived in fear. Who was the killer? Was it still in Moscow? Was he watching them? Then came a break, a major break. The DNA from under Madison Mogen's fingernails matched someone in the system. Minor offense. His name was Bryan Kohberger. Bryan Kohberger was 28 years old. He wasn't a student. He wasn't part of the college scene. He was a graduate student in criminology at the Washington State University, just 8 miles away. When investigators looked deeper, they found something chilling. Kohberger lived just blocks from the crime scene. He had access to the area. He knew the neighborhood, and most importantly, his DNA was at the murder scene. At first, he cooperated. He seemed nervous, but he maintained his innocence. Then came the arrest warrant. Based on the DNA evidence, forensic analysis, and witness testimony, Bryan Kohberger was arrested and charged with 4 counts of murder. Investigators laid out their case. The DNA evidence was definitive. Kohberger's DNA matched samples from the crime scene, but there was more. Security footage showed a white sedan leaving the area around the time of the murders. He drove a white Hyundai Elantra. Cell phone data showed his location near the crime scene on the night of the murders. Kohberger's search history revealed disturbing searches. He searched for information about crime scenes, about unsolved murders, about getting away with researching how to commit the perfect crime. What was his motive? Why would a quiet graduate student brutally murder 4 people he'd never met? Investigators believe Kohberger was obsessed with control and power. His research interests focused on criminal psychology and deviant behavior. Friends describe him as a socially awkward, withdrawn, obsessed with true crime. Some investigators theorize he may have saw the victims at a local establishment. Perhaps he felt rejected. Perhaps he fantasized about violence. And on November 13, those fantasies became real. But Kohberger has never fully explained why, and he's never shown remorse. Bryan Kohberger entered a plea of not guilty. His defense team has questioned the DNA evidence. They challenged the investigation, but the evidence is overwhelming. Kohberger sits in jail, awaiting trial. The case has gripped the nation. A quiet town, a brutal crime, a killer living amongst them in the whole time. But behind the investigation and evidence are 4 young people who should be alive. Bryan Kohberger, who loved her friends and lived without fear. Madison Mogen, whose laugh was infectious and whose loyalty was unwavering. Xana Kernodle, who had dreams and plans and a whole life ahead of her. Ethan Chaplin, just 18 years old, just at the beginning to discover who he was. All 4 were taken. All 4 were stolen from their families. All 4 will never graduate, never fall in love, never build the lives that they dreamed of. The Moscow murders taught us that evil can hide in plain sight. A graduate student studying crime, a man living in the shadows of a college town, a killer surrounded by potential victims who never knew the danger. Bryan Kohberger stands accused of one of the most brutal crimes in recent American history. The evidence against him is substantial. The DNA doesn't lie. His location data doesn't lie. His own research doesn't lie. What remains is the search for answers. Why did he do it? What was he thinking? Will he ever explain the motivation behind the deaths of 4 innocent young people? Those answers may never come, but the victims will be remembered, and their families will demand justice. And a small town will never forget the November night that changed everything.